question. So the context is basically what we know to be true around general health and longevity.
I mean, what happens if I eat more calories than my body needs? If you're listening in today, welcome to Beyond the Pump, where we break down the business of fitness and nutrition. And today we're going to talk about what actually matters when it comes to nutrition. Because let's face it, today, social media, the news, everything else in between, we're all a little bit lost. What's important? What's not important? How much does it matter? How impactful is it? Ultimately, I'm here to break down whether white rice or sweet potatoes is the thing you need to be worrying about. What are you going to talk about today, Andrew? Not white rice and sweet potatoes.
Everything that's not that. We'll put that in the hierarchy, but I think that with how much misinformation, or I wouldn't even say misinformation, I think that a lot of people get shit on right now because they're like, oh, you're saying the wrong thing, or like, that's not accurate. We find research flip-flops all the time because the situations in which how they conduct those research items, those are the constraints that dictate whether something's true or not. If you're doing something with the elderly, it's going to be very different than teenage athletes oftentimes. And so we're just going to go through and say, this is the through line. These are the things that we know work best for most people. And from there, you're probably going to have to kind of go left or right a little bit and basically make those subtle changes off of that. So the intention today is just give you a framework, whether you're a coach, whether you're a consumer, whether you're anyone that's just interested in your own health. These are the things that we know to be true across most people.
And
so
I just have one clarifying question, probably for myself, or maybe for everybody else. When we're talking about the hierarchy, what's most important, least important, etc., are we talking about it in a general health perspective, producing results perspective? Like what's the perspective that we're going to be breaking this down by?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the context is basically what we know to be true around general health and longevity. And I will give credit where credit's due. The first person I heard talk about this was Jason Phillips over at the Nutritional Coaching Institute. And he presented this model of the triangle of awareness. Now, there's a lot of other trade-off paradigms. We talk about adaptive trade-offs in some of our stuff, but I really like that he kept it so simple from the perspective of you either chase what you want to look like, you chase what you want to feel like, or you chase how you want to perform. Obviously, that's a lot more simple than the complex way that he proposed it, but I think that it takes a lot of the nutrition stuff that is circulating in the atmosphere and in the industry, and it helps kind of break it down into one of those three buckets. Now, the nutritional periodization stuff that was presented, of course, I think could have definitely been a lot more improved, and we're working on clarifying that in our own course, as well as we'll be talking about that in I think 2 or 3 episodes around how to organize the variables of your specific nutrition plan to make sure that you have the best chance at being effective. Because let's be honest, progress isn't guaranteed, and if you're not taking a structured approach, it's even your chances of success are drastically decreased. So I would say that would be the context is general. How do you feel? And then if you want to change how you look or how you perform, those are going to be different use cases that we'll talk about later on in the season.
All right. Well, I would say let's give it to him quick here. Let's break down in order. Most important to least, or least to most, however you thought this out in your brain, Andrew. And then after that, let's dive in and maybe some details. But I'm definitely going to be curious why sweet potatoes and rice is not the primary thing I need to solve. And if you haven't been listening for a while, it's an inside joke. It's funny. It's been running now for like 3-4 years. Go find that episode that we talk about that in there. But yeah, let's break this down. What order are we going, first of all? Most or least, starting with?
We're going to start with the most.
Okay. Most important, least important.
Right. Yeah, our new podcast producer suggested that we have to give you guys more value up front. And as much as I want to go the other way, we'll stick with his guidance. So we're coachable, by the way. We're also receiving feedback all the time. So thank you for providing that. And if you haven't, we would love to comment. We would love to see your comments on anything that you'd like to hear us talk about, or any of the formatting that you think would make it more digestible. But from top to bottom, and we're going to give you the list up front. And from there, we'll go and explain them kind of one at a time. But I would say that the person's circumstances and situation is probably the most important thing, which is obviously not necessarily nutritionally related, but it'll change how much stuff you can put on that person at one time. And that includes the trust. If they don't trust you, you have to keep it very simple. very tactical and not super long-winded, right? The next thing that matters when it comes to actually managing your weight, which is what the majority of clients want. They're going to want to lose weight. They don't even care about fat loss. I would say in my experience, most people aren't even informed enough to distinguish weight loss from fat loss until you bring it up and help them clarify some of those things. Most people don't want to be skinny fat. But if all they care about is weight loss, energy balance is the most important thing. You have to put someone in a calorie deficit, right? Then the next thing is macronutrient composition or distribution. Basically, what we're saying is that your weight is controlled by your calories. Your macros will control your body composition, how much muscle tissue you retain, your hormonal balance. A lot of those things are based upon your macros. The third thing is your micronutrient density, which is if you think about the quality of food, eating a hamburger might give you the right amount of calories that you need for specific intention, but it's usually going to be a little bit more devoid of a lot more micronutrients that you might get from different plant-based sources, such as fruits and vegetables, right? But I would say that those are probably the three big buckets. And then the fourth would probably be hydration/fluid balance, making sure you're taking enough water for a lot of those biochemical processes to occur. Because if you don't drink enough water, you're going to decrease a lot of your physical functioning. Like your brain's not going to work as well. Your heart's going to have to work harder. You will just generally feel more fatigued. And so those are generally speaking the orders of energy balance / calories, macronutrient distribution, micronutrient density, and then obviously fluid balance. And then you kind of keep going from there. You look at digestion. It gets more granular. But when we talk about the big rocks versus the pebbles versus the sand, I would say those four things are probably the big rocks, with the jar being your client's basic capacity for change.
So environment is a relationship to kind of that capacity, that jar, whatever we'll say.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
The better their environment, strain, stress, sleep, all those components, life, job, blah blah blah. Maybe the bigger that jar might be, then you can shove more shit in there. And then calories, then macros, then micros, then water or hydration is going to be kind of that order in which we want to put things into that jar, loosely, so to speak. You want to know? You want to know what's cool about that?
Mm.
I actually guessed each one before you said it. I'm catching on. Finally. I just got to figure out when I'm supposed to eat sweet potatoes versus white rice. But
that's a great. We'll talk about that when it comes to the performance section.
So when it comes to environment, breaking that down a little bit, like what are some keys or components that we need to be on the lookout as coaches to understand how big that jar might be, if you will?
Yeah.
So really, Andrew, that needs to be a social media post. Like you, the jar, the gravel, like you did. That was a really good, kind of like bridge that you built there. Every single person definitely sees it because I see it visually.
Yeah, here we go. So there's the jar. And then if you want the magic trick, there's the jar.
Where'd it go?
There's no jar. There's no jar. Yeah, so things that people should be considerate of. We talk about social determinants of health, and that should be a whole podcast episode, probably in the next season that we'll discuss that. But when it comes to determining someone's bandwidth for change, we want to look at the professional requirements. Let me back up for a second. We want to have them list out all their priorities, right? And then we want to have them force rank them, meaning like, all right, what are you looking at? What's important to you? If we find that nutrition's at the bottom and we give them something that's very attention intensive, meaning we need you to literally do a time study for your day, and that's not even on their radar because we want to see when they're eating. We need to see what they're eating. That might be something that's just a mismatch in terms of priority, effort, and attention. So after we have people do that, which by the way, there's a really helpful thing that Andy Galpin presented in I can't remember where I heard it, but he creates this thing called the inventory. And I think this is actually a really great way to answer this question and to give people something useful that can help them measure it. And I do this with all my clients, especially ones that are busy. It's called the inventory, and you kind of create 4 columns. Column 1's work, right? Your professional focus. Column 2 is your relationships. You're talking about friends, family, loved ones, professional relationships, all that stuff, kind of like the social stuff. right? And then you look at number 3 is your training slash fitness. And you look at number 4, which is your recovery slash self-care. You give someone 10 points. You say, hey, hold up both hands, give me all 10 fingers. And if you're missing a finger, we give you an extra one, right? You got 10 points to distribute across these four categories. You only get 10. Where are you currently, based upon your day to day, if someone were to look at your life, where would you put these points in regards to the attention and focus? And they distribute them and then say, okay, cool. They're usually pretty eye opening. But then you have them do it for what would you like it to be across this next little bit. And that's what we call the client centered approach, where it's a pick your own journey. If as a coach, you come in there, you tell them what to do, you give them a lot of the directive style of coaching, most people don't really respond well to that out of the gate. They like to know that it's a reciprocal thing. They like to know that you can handle the situation. So that's where I say, depending upon how much trust is there, which is how well they feel you understand them, generally speaking, your environmental constraints broaden drastically, because now you're having to, if you tell them to go grocery shopping, right, and they're busy all the time, their spouse is now normally the one that does it, like you create different friction points that aren't necessarily readily available or apparent in that recommendation. So I would say if you're looking at the environmental stuff, you're going to want to understand where their priorities are, where their current focus is, from the things that we generally understand most people care about. And then creating recommendations that don't interfere with those things. That's probably the biggest situation that I would say.
All right.
Be mindful of.
So thing number 2, calories. I feel like this one can be made very, very simple, but what happens if I eat more calories than my body needs versus what happens if I eat less calories than my body needs?
Yeah, so we know that based upon physics, science, um, there's some things that are currently true universally. And that means that you can't create or destroy something, right? I can't take this thing that is what we call a remarkable. It's like a pen, paper, tablet. I can't take that and snap my fingers and turn it into an iPad or into an iPhone or into a tree, right? That's not how that works. There's a transitional process. And so when we think about, you can't necessarily create or destroy anything, you can just transform its physicality, so to speak. Body's the same way. When your body is constantly producing energy to keep the lights on, to keep your eyes focused, to keep your brain functioning, keep your heart beating, all the things you don't really think about, for me, like waving my hand, even vibrating my vocal cords, you know, um, all that stuff takes energy. And so we know that your total daily energy expenditure, basically how many calories you burn during the day, which, let's just take a second here and say that calories are just energy. That's literally it. So if your client might freak out if they hear the word calorie, or they might have an overly negative connotation for that, then maybe you just change it to energy. Like, hey, we're talking about how much energy you're consuming versus producing every day. And, you know, I think that becomes a very disarming way and perspective shift for that person that you're talking to. But if you eat more than you burn, meaning you're less active than what you consume, you're going to probably store that stuff away. And it's a survival mechanism. It's actually really cool. Because I mean, if you kind of harken back to the previous days where you might not have a readily available food source most days, or like you need to kind of maybe time your meals a little bit differently, you might have to be able to store some extra fat as a fuel source, right? For periods of going without. So pretty cool. On the opposite end, if you are more active and burn more calories or use more energy than what you take in, it's kind of like going into your savings account and spending all your money out of there. Eventually, it's going to run out. And so this is where your bank account will get smaller, or basically thinking about your energy stores. You store most of your energy in your muscles, right? And in your body fat. And then you kind of pick and choose, like you'll use that stuff as you go through it. Just very simple explanation. And so your savings account, again, muscles and body fat, that stuff, when you're not eating and you've used what's circulating, your body's going to go into those things and it's going to start pulling it out to use, right? But that bill's going to come due and you're going to have to replenish that. Otherwise, you get into some weird territory. If you're in a caloric deficit too long, you find that things don't really work as well as they should. Your mood's kind of funky. You're a little depressed. You may be a little grouchy or snappy. Like, so that would be kind of the caloric surplus, is eating more than what you need. You're going to gain weight. If you eat less than what you need, or what we call a caloric or energy deficit, you're then going to inherently, right, lose your weight because you have to go into what you have stored and use it. And then you have your energy balance, which is, or basically your maintenance calories, which is basically what you need to stay exactly where you are. And one of the fastest ways to go about figuring that out is look at your weight, weigh yourself every day, kind of start to understand what you're eating on a day-to-day basis. If your weight's staying same, chances are you're at maintenance. And so just eating a little bit less can be a really non-invasive way for people to start to manipulate the weight. But yeah, so that would probably what I would suggest is just creating some awareness, weigh yourself daily, look at the average weekly, and then kind of making some small changes from there.
So, next thing here on our list is macros. Talk about those.
Yeah, so when it goes from environment, which we talked about thus far, now we've looked at calories, now we're going into the macros. We know that macronutrients all have a different role, and macronutrients generally encapsulate protein, carbohydrates, and dietary fat. Some people will throw water in there, some people won't. So I actually associate water with a macronutrient, which is why I listed as fourth. Because without appropriate water intake, none of the rest of your functions are going to work. You can go 2 to 3 days without water before you expire, die, right? So oddly enough, I would say that's probably the most important. From there, if you want to maintain your muscle tissue or you want to have that toned appearance, you're going to need to build some muscle tissue, which means you're going to need to consume protein. And protein basically gets broken down to amino acids. You might even heard the term peptide, which is just a couple different amino acids put together. But long and short of it is that you want to build lean body mass so that way when you lose fat, you have that toned appearance. Protein is going to be the most important thing for you. You're probably going to want about 1.6 to 2, but basically 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight or fat-free mass. Might be a little bit more, but that's probably a good range for most people to shoot for. To my carbohydrates, I like to put those second because they're more activity dependent. You might find other organizations that say that it's inverse. Sure, if you have a good rationale for it, I get it. I like to go carbohydrate second because I take a more performance-based approach, meaning you should work out hard. Carbohydrates are the body's preferred fuel source for the most part, and they're heavily used when it comes to anaerobic activity like weightlifting. So if you want to be good at weightlifting, you need to give yourself the right fuel source. Otherwise, you're going to find that it's a little more hard or challenging, or you might just feel a little more fatigued, or you might not see the strength gains, which we know is really important for building muscle tissue. And then the third thing is dietary fat, which tends to help with a lot of different cellular functions, keeping your cells nice and healthy, keeping your hormones functioning well, keeping your nerves healthy and keeping them in their little fat jackets or your myelin sheaths. So that's probably what I would say about macros. Down and dirty.
Moving on to micros.
Yeah, so if you want to change how you feel and control that, excuse me, we know that micronutrients are heavily associated with mood state and energy, kind of metabolism. B vitamins particularly, so if someone's plant-based, they might find that they are going to be very bereft of the ability to take the food that they're consuming and make good use of it, right? It's kind of like if you want to think about the analogy of having nails and you're building a house and not having a nail gun. Like I would consider the vitamins basically if carbohydrates and glucose and energy metabolism are the nails, you need the thing to actually break those apart and to make them useful, which would be the nail gun. Or the hammer, if you want to think about it like that. But vitamins, by and large, are going to be organic substances that help you basically, create energy from the food that you're consuming. And then you look at minerals, which are the other type of micronutrient, and they help with a lot of other functions as well that, have a lot to do with like nerve conduction, so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, if you're not feeling well, chances are I would look at how much energy you're consuming. Then I would look at how much micronutrient stuff are you consuming. And then, I would probably use those as some of the decision-making items around making sure that as you're putting together a comprehensive plan, very simply, look at what you're eating, look at what you're getting. What are you doing? What are you getting? What are you doing? What are you getting? If you don't like what you're getting, then reverse engineer that and upgrade what you're doing, making small changes at a time and letting those changes have like 1 to 3 weeks before you start making another change. It does take time. And so that's kind of like the fifth dimension here of after we talk about fluid balance, which drinking half your body weight in ounces per day can be a good place for some people to start. And make sure that you don't overconsume, because we know that there are some 100-pound females that are drinking 128 ounces of water, making themselves probably predisposed to hyponatremia, and basically just like kind of not really being productive. So you can always have too much. You can have not enough. Look for the Goldilocks zone using those criteria. And I think that that's probably a good nutritional hierarchy for the majority of people to start to feel their best and potentially perform a little bit better.
All right. There you have it. In order, in priority order, what you need to worry about as a coach when you're building things, plans, programs, whatever it might be for your clients, explaining it, making sure that they understand, hey, if we don't get this, we probably shouldn't work on that yet, and just prioritizing from your level. This isn't for everybody. This isn't for every single situation. This is obviously a generalization. So use your skill set, use your good nutrition certification, not one that you paid for but didn't get an actual kind of test to pass on the other side, and make sure that you know your stuff and you can actually service somebody and create the result that they're paying you for. So we appreciate your time, spending some time here with us at Beyond the Pump, where we break down the business of fitness and nutrition. Hit that like button if you watch this, hit that subscribe button so you can see the next ones, and throw some comments down there on what you want us to break down. Until next time, gang.